So, good morning, everyone. So, my name is Stéphanie Revault, and you see me from my apartment in Rennes, so the capital of Brittany, at the west of France. And you can see it on the map. I don't know if you see it because the map is quite small, but yeah, so the city is on the map. So first, I would like to thank you for your invitation to talk about my local church and the city I live in. There will be, of course, so much to talk about. The local church I serve in Rennes is 40 years old. It had faced many challenges over the years, the last one being, of course, dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. It had also experienced and still does many blessings from the Lord. I thought you will find interesting if I chose to talk about my church through the topic of identity, the complex identity of our city and the complex identity of our local church, and how these two are related and how this identity carries its blessings and also its specific challenges. To say I'm impressed by this talk is an understatement. It's the first time I give a long talk in English in my life, so please bear with me, and I hope you will understand me. So first, about the title, Growing a Church in France's Favorite City, I didn't mean to brag. A recent poll indicated that in terms of quality of life, schools, green spaces, opportunities to work, study, etc., the city of Rennes has overall the best notes. I'm sure you can find other polls with much different results, but I like this one. And it's still true that Rennes is usually held up as a very good place to live in. Rennes is the capital of Brittany. I'd like to give you a few words about the identity of the region of Brittany. Many British families like to spend their holidays here. So for those of you who are familiar with Brittany, you probably noticed that this region is quite traditional. It is usually associated with a very old Celtic background, with its 1500 years old language called Breton. Very rich, still very much alive Catholic customs, you know, like especially worship towards multiple local saints and local pilgrimages. Also a literature filled with ancient, mystical and quite morbid legends. Rustic cuisine, traditional music and line dancing. Some of you may have enjoyed the Summer Celtic Festival in Lorient. You see, it's at the south of Brittany. Also fishing villages and cities with stone houses along the coast, a calm lifestyle, and a local population, the Breton, with a reserved and quite resilient character. The list goes on. If you have never been to Brittany, I think this description reminds you of Ireland, maybe. And but also the Irish and the Breton are quite distant, so distant cousins after all, so that's maybe normal. All these cultural elements are true, but this description seems to define the region as very much stuck in the past. The reality, as usual, is much more complex than this cultural postcard. One place especially stands out and seems at first sight not really related to those traditions, the capital, Rennes. So that's my third slide. So I think I'm going to start to play a bit the touristic guide of the city of Rennes, because I would like to give you some insight about the history of the city, especially how its identity was built, because it affects actually our church. Those insights will explain the economic and social context of the area where our church was founded and how it shapes the specific demography of our assembly. So a few historic milestones about Rennes. The city is more than 2,000 years old. It's very old. There was a Gallic population, the Riedon, living in a village there, and a Roman city was built upon it. And the name comes from this population. It is located almost at the border between Brittany and the rest of France. So a fringe location that explains its lack of influence even today over the region, especially the western part. Rennes is sometimes accused of being its own island, not really taking its role as a capital, and there's some truth in it. Rennes is also located at the crossroads between several main roads and rivers, again between Brittany and the rest of the country. This position has always attracted merchants who were able to bring over and sell products from other places, even foreign countries, which attracted people from other regions seeking for a more comfortable lifestyle. So unlike the rest of Brittany, that had for a very long time a very stable and very local population, Rennes developed a quite unique identity over the centuries with several influences. The region stayed for a while an independent kingdom, then an independent duchy until the 16th century. After a long siege of the city by the French army, in 1532, the Duchess, Anne of Brittany, accepted the marriage proposal, not really a proposal, but anyway, from the French king. And Rennes became officially the capital of Brittany, and the entire region became French. Well, technically. The region has been struggling with the French rule ever since. So when the city was ravaged by a huge fire in 1720 that destroyed half of the city in 3 days, the French king Louis XIV made sure that the city was rebuilt the French way, to make a point. I'm not sure the population got the memo, because 500 years later, we usually still consider ourselves Breton before French. I know it's quite amusing, but this independent mindset, especially towards the French authorities, is still very much alive. Like many cities in France, Rennes has a rich religious history, very Catholic. Just walking by the streets of the old center of the city, you'll be surprised by the number of big churches, including the beautiful Cathedral of St. Peter. The Protestant Reformation in the 16th century had little impact in the city. In fact, the temple was, there was just one temple, and it was frequently attacked by the very Catholic population. Then the Protestant religion was forbidden in the kingdom for a while. Only in 1872, 200 years later, another Protestant temple was built in the city. And I fast forward, at the end of the Second World War, a big part of the city was destroyed. It started then developing new industries and welcomed one of the biggest manufacturers of Citroën, you know, the automobile brand. This new economic prosperity attracted people, many people from countryside, who were looking for jobs, and then people from other regions. Today, 40 years later, you can see some pictures of the slide. This prosperity is still growing, almost jumping, actually. Rennes today is one of the most dynamic, modern, open cities in the country. It is described as very young. It has more than 65,000 students. Curious about the world, loves to party. Well, it's a student city, so of course. Very foodie, there is more than 500 restaurants. And also the smallest city in the world with the metro. It has huge ambition, like becoming a European metropolis. Interesting, the city looks forward to live and work more on a European scale than on a French one. Still this very independent mindset. Then about the identity of our church, Rennes Sud, I might say that our church reflects a lot the history and identity of the city. So I put a few pictures here. I think these pictures were taken like maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I'm sorry, we are not really good with taking pictures. So, but it reflects, I think, a bit about our congregation, like it was 6 or 7 years ago. So I was mentioning that the city attracts many people from different places and backgrounds. Well, the founder of the church was actually an Englishman. I don't know if you know him. His name was Gordon Margery. Maybe some of you know him. Married to a Scottish lady, Avril. They arrived late 1970s with the organization OM. When we celebrated the 40th birthday of our church a few years ago, Gordon came for the occasion from Paris where he retired, and told us the circumstances of their arrival here 40 years ago. He told us that he actually introduced himself to the mayor, who welcomed well his initiative to plant an evangelical church. The mayor himself was an admirer of Paul Ricoeur, a French Protestant philosopher. With another young pastor, Gordon openly talked about the gospel to the locals selling books on local markets and presenting the gospel with the creative cards in city places. And remind you, it's France we talk about, a very secular society. So their initiative was actually really bold. But it was the 70s, you know, more freedom, and the population of Rennes is a curious one. So people didn't really feel offended by this public demonstration of faith. I know it will be different now. It will be different now. The secularism takes a dangerous turn in France today. Many officials in the government don't really want to see any manifestation of faith in public areas. But I'll say local officials in Rennes are usually more tolerant on this matter. Still, with all this work, there were very few conversions. The ones who turned to Christ were mostly people not born in Rennes, but coming in Rennes for job opportunities. This tendency increased over the years. Our assembly congregation today is about 180 people, including 50 children. Very few were born here or even born in Brittany, except the children. I'm one of the exceptions as an adult being born in Rennes. The members of our church association are still French for 75% of them, which we find very reassuring because it gives more roots to the church. And the locals are less tempted to see us as foreigners, because we need to know that in France, evangelicals are still very much associated with the USA. Still, it is a multicultural church, a dozen of nationalities, and half of the assembly is African. The tradition of attracting and welcoming people in the city is still strong, except now it's at a much bigger scale. Many associations, including Protestant ones, help migrants to have a decent living here. I've heard several times that some of the reason this openness is still here in a society that tends to close its doors, it's because there is an old habit of helping the ones in need, inheritance of the Catholic faith, the Catholic Church being very much alive here. And also because of the youth of the city. We have a very, very politicized youth here in Rennes, and there's no weekend here without protest on the street, you know, calling against social injustice, etc. And also there is also an international ambition of the city. So it explains why in our church, there's a quite high number of international students who usually stay a few years, French researchers who work in network with international universities, and migrant families. And because this city offers multiple job opportunities, especially in service enterprises, we have all kinds of people coming and going every year. Our pastor, Vincent, our pastor calculated a turnover of 15 to 20% every year. So every year, 15 to 20% of our congregation changes, actually. It's a lot. This congregation, as you can imagine, has a complex identity, a bit like the one of the city. Very diverse, very different social backgrounds, always changing. Of course, when you serve in this church, it's extremely thrilling, but also it brings its own challenges. Like, how do you build something in long term when a significant part of the church doesn't stay long? And how do you connect people together when they are so different? And a personal challenge for me, how do you walk on spiritual journeys with people from different cultures? Some differences need bridges that are not easy to build up. This context forces us to constantly adapt, learn, being very intentional and active in our fellowship, always paying attention to the newbies without putting aside the older members who sometimes feel overwhelmed by this constant change and by the diversity. I will add something there. Like everywhere in the world, the current crisis we live in is changing the way we function as a church. And we don't know to what extent it affects or it will affect us. The crisis challenges us to be way more creative, taking way more risk than usual, so we can still have a good church life and we can still connect all these very different people together. We realize that once we face this challenge as a whole body, it truly brings blessings. And I would like to give you 3 examples. The first one is we used to regret that we are not a neighborhood church. Members are living all over the metropolis. There is like more than 60 kilometers between 2 of our families. Right before the crisis, the elders of our church decided to use this fact actually as an opportunity instead. They created sectors with leaders in which of, each of them, the leaders were responsible for pastoral care. All the members were invited to join a home group every week in their sector to study the Bible and pray together. The home groups are online now, and it still works well, actually. It helped create more fellowship between people and a stronger bond. And the group leaders take very, very seriously their responsibility of pastoral care, calling and visiting when possible. The second example is the church was also asked to take better care of our international students. Some live with very little money. So since January, we collect food every week for them as a sign of solidarity, and it works very well. And the third example is we were worried that some families seem quite distant last year. We couldn't organize Sunday school anymore, and we knew some families didn't have internet at home, so they couldn't watch our services online. So we completely reorganized our services, church services, to have a family service once a month in our building and 2 shorter services every Sunday, so more people could come and connect with other members again. At last, I would like to end this talk by sharing about a vision our Union Church perspective has about the region of Brittany. A vision in which our church in Rennes could have a big part to play. So as I explained earlier, the identity of Rennes and the one of the rest of the region seems very different. The postcard I give you made it look that way. But the reality is more complex. For example, the other cities of Brittany are way more open to the world now. The population is growing with an increasing diversity. So our assemblies, our congregations actually now are quite similar, and we face some common challenges. Perspective really believes, and I share that belief, that churches working in a network at a regional level could be very beneficial to all of us Christians. We could make a deeper impact on the region. I also serve alongside the Perspective Regional Director, and I see some areas this kind of networks could invest, like pastors sharing more about how to address some of our challenges in our local context, sharing more resources, making projects together at a regional scale, and being way more intentional in prayer for the region together. I don't know if you can spot Rennes on the map. It's the red spot on the right. Yeah. Last word. I have a pretty optimistic mindset, but I must confess that the spiritual heaviness in this region, Rennes included, made me several times a bit hopeless. God actually encouraged me in this aspect lately by refreshing my vision. I believe God has a great sense of humor because he inspired actually 2 France mission supporters to send me emails lately with words of wisdom and faith. And those words reminded me that God really loves the people here and that he really wants salvation and revival for this region, and that his grace will conquer all evil here. I know this vision seems obvious, but I truly needed to hear those words again. So thank you to them, and thank you to God, of course, for that. And I would like to end with a few prayer requests. So about our church, Rennes Sud, I would like, if it's possible, for you to pray for healing and restoration. The last 12 months being a very difficult time for some, and that we as a church stay committed to help, encourage, and love each other. The second prayer request is about the city, Rennes. I would like you to pray for that our church life is and still, and what's the word? Yeah, I will pray that we give a good testimony of God's truth and grace, and that we stay relevant in the way to express it to the ever-changing population of the metropolis. And about Brittany, I would like you to pray that we will let God inspire us and equip us in this desire to work on a regional level, so that it will bring good fruits for his glory.